People always said David and I were the couple you'd bet money on. You know the type. Steady, affectionate, just the right amount of fun. We hosted the kind of dinner parties that made friends stay too long and drink too much, and I loved it. The candles, the playlists, the homemade risotto. It all felt like home to me. And David, he was the perfect partner in crime, always offering seconds, remembering everyone's names, charming even the shy ones into conversation. I used to think we had something rare. Looking back, maybe I loved the illusion more than I loved the man. There's a strange comfort in being seen as the lucky one. I clung to that. I built my whole life around it. And when friends drifted away, I chalked it up to life. Schedules, distance, kids. I never questioned why the energy in the room changed sometimes, why a friend's smile faded just a little too quickly when David walked in. I trusted him. I trusted us. That was my first mistake. It happened on a Sunday, laundry day. I had my usual playlist on, the soft hum of the dryer in the background. I reached into the hamper to pull out a handful of towels and felt something silky, unfamiliar. At first, I thought maybe it was one of mine I hadn't worn in a while, but the color was wrong, the texture too, and when I held it up my stomach turned cold. A pair of lacy underwear. Not mine. The size, the brand, even the faint perfume. It all pointed to someone else. And not just someone. I knew exactly who it belonged to. Julia. My friend Julia. I froze, still holding the thing like it might suddenly vanish and take the sick feeling with it. I told myself it could be a mistake, some mix-up. But even then, a quiet voice inside me had already started to whisper something awful, something I wasn't ready to hear just yet. After that, everything felt off. The silence in the house got louder. I kept replaying old conversations with Julia in my head, the way she avoided eye contact that last night, the rushed goodbyes, the hug that lingered too long or maybe not long enough. It was like someone handed me a jigsaw puzzle, but I'd been forcing the wrong pieces together for years. Now they were falling apart one by one, and I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unknow it. I started remembering things I never paid attention to. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't rewrite the past, it just lights it up in a way you wish it wouldn't. At first, I tried to pretend it was just that one time. Just Julia. I needed it to be small, containable, something I could process and maybe, eventually, forgive. But that hope died fast, because when I thought about it, really thought about it, she wasn't the only friend who had pulled away. There were others, too many, women I'd shared wine with, cried with, trusted. Women who suddenly stopped calling, made vague excuses, canceled weekend plans without rescheduling. And every time I brought one of them into my home, David had been there, smiling that same easy smile. I started reaching out, casually at first. Little check-ins. Hey, I miss you. Let's catch up. Some replied politely but stayed distant. Others ignored me altogether. It wasn't normal. My gut wouldn't shut up about it. So I got bolder. I scrolled through old photos, found moments I hadn't looked at in years. I studied body language, eyes, half smiles. I looked for cracks in the film, and God help me, they were everywhere. I just hadn't wanted to see them before. But now, it was like peeling wallpaper and finding rot underneath. The more I dug, the uglier it got. I created a burner account and started messaging a few women I used to call sisters. Most didn't reply. A couple did. One broke down in messages, saying she didn't know I didn't know, that she thought we were open, that David told her we had some kind of agreement. My hands shook so badly I could barely type. I remember staring at the screen, the words blurring into static. I felt like my whole body had turned inside out. Everything I thought was mine, my marriage, my friendships, my home, had been rearranged without my consent. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there next to him, David, listening to his breathing, watching the rise and fall of his chest like I was staring at a stranger in my bed. He reached for me at one point, murmured something in his sleep. I didn't move. I felt like if I touched him, I'd dissolve into something I couldn't come back from. My body felt foreign. My skin didn't fit right. And I remember thinking, how long has this been going on? Not just the cheating, the pretending, the smiling. The hand on my lower back while he talked to my friends. Was any of it real? In the morning, I made coffee like usual. I stood in the kitchen barefoot, the smell of cinnamon creamer hanging in the air, and I waited for him to come in. He did. Kissed my cheek, told me he had a big meeting later. I smiled and nodded like I always did. But inside, something was cracking. Not snapping, no, this was slower, like ice giving way beneath your feet. I looked at him and realized I had no idea who this man was. And somehow, the scariest part wasn't what he did. It was how good he was at hiding it. I started cataloging everything. Every suspicious look, every text that made no sense, every moment he lingered a little too long near someone I trusted. I became obsessed, not with catching him, I already knew. I was obsessed with the question why. Why me? Why them? Was I boring? Too predictable? Too trusting? I even started blaming myself, which I know now is what so many women do. We bend ourselves into shapes we think will make us lovable, then wonder what part of us made someone break the mold anyway. But deep down, beneath all the pain and confusion, a quiet fury began to grow. Not rage, not yet, just this steady heat in my chest, humming like a wire pulled too tight. I didn't want to scream. I wanted to understand, and then I wanted to burn it all down. I wasn't ready yet, but I knew I would be. Because once the mask falls, there's no unseeing the face underneath. And something told me I hadn't even scratched the surface. I didn't confront him. Not right away. That would have been too easy, too loud, and honestly, I think part of me wanted to see if he'd give himself away. So I smiled. I kissed him goodnight. I asked about his day, nodded in all the right places. I even started wearing the necklace he gave me on our 5th anniversary, just to watch his eyes light up like I was still his, like I didn't already know who he really was. Pretending became my armor, and I wore it well. We went out for dinner one night, just the two of us. He picked the place, some cozy little Italian spot where they know our names and always bring extra breadsticks. He ordered the wine, told a story about his co-worker, laughed too loudly, and I watched him. Every smile. Every hand gesture. I watched how he looked at the waitress. Too long, too soft. And I wondered if she'd end up on the list someday. Or maybe she already had. The thought used to make me nauseous. Now, it just sharpened the blade. I decided to invite someone over. Someone I hadn't seen in a while. One of the women I suspected. Just us girls, I said. David lit up when I told him. Offered to cook. Suggested her favorite wine. Said, "It'll be like old times." And I nodded, watching him, pretending to forget he was the reason those times had ended. During dinner, I studied them, how he leaned in when she spoke, the way his hand brushed her shoulder when he passed the salad bowl. It wasn't just flirting. It was muscle memory. But she wasn't the same either. There was guilt in her eyes. Her laugh faltered, her fork clinked too loudly against her plate. And I realized something in that moment. I wasn't the only one pretending. She knew I knew. Maybe not for sure, but enough to be uncomfortable. And that was when it hit me. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was watching from the inside. And they had no idea just how much I'd already seen. I started reaching out to the women, one by one, quietly. I wasn't interested in drama. I wanted clarity, closure, maybe. Not that I expected honesty, but I underestimated how heavy guilt can sit on someone's chest when they think no one's looking. A few ignored me entirely. One blocked me. But then came the ones who cracked. Not all at once, but piece by piece. They confessed without saying the word. I didn't know what we were doing. He said you were open. It just happened. I kept a straight face through every message. Some were defensive, others broke down. One sent a voice note, her voice trembling as she apologized, not even knowing if I'd listen. I did. I listened to every second. Not because I needed her guilt, but because I needed to feel something. Even pity would do. I wasn't angry yet, not like people imagine. I was methodical, focused. I wrote everything down, screenshots, dates. I started recording things on my phone, conversations with David, moments that felt off, like I was building a case no one had asked for, except me. Then came Sophie, my maid of honor, my oldest friend. She didn't answer my texts, so I called. No answer. I messaged. Nothing. Until I wrote, I know. That was all it took. She responded within minutes, not with a denial, not with an apology, but with silence. Just a single period. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't just infidelity. It was betrayal at a level I couldn't even process yet. She'd stood next to me while I promised forever. And apparently, she'd been breaking that promise behind my back the whole time. That one hurt more than the others. I sat on the kitchen floor, phone still in my hand, and let the ache swallow me whole. I thought I had been numb. I wasn't. I was bleeding internally, and no one could see it. That's when I whispered it, half to myself, half to the ghost of the woman I used to be. If he wanted to break something, I'll show him what it means to be shattered. And just like that, my grief turned into something sharper, something I could finally use. After Sophie, I stopped hoping for clean answers. I stopped needing them. The truth had already done its damage. Now it was about what I would do with it, so I kept smiling. I laughed at David's jokes. I made dinner reservations. I sat beside him on the couch and leaned my head on his shoulder, pretending not to notice how his texts made him tilt the screen away, pretending not to feel the weight of every lie tucked between our walls. I became so good at pretending, even I almost forgot I was acting. But behind that smile, I was building something. A version of myself that wasn't soft, that wasn't polite. I stopped asking why and started asking how far. How far was I willing to go to make him see me, really see me, for who he'd underestimated all this time? I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw his clothes on the lawn or smash dishes. That wasn't me. My pain didn't look like chaos. It looked like precision. I created folders on a hard drive, labeled everything, color-coded. I backed it all up twice, every text, every voicemail, every photo, confession, time-stamped message. I even started scripting what I might say, rehearsing lines in the mirror like a woman preparing for court or war. It was strange how calm I felt, like something inside me had clicked. I wasn't the woman who folded laundry and waited for the lies to stop falling out. I was someone else now, someone watching from the inside, calculating in plain sight. And David? He never saw it coming. He thought he'd won, like most men do when they think you'll never leave, never fight back. He'd gotten away with so much for so long, he didn't realize the show had already started. And I was just waiting for the perfect time to raise the curtain. I told him I was planning something special for our anniversary. 10 years, a whole decade. He lit up like a kid on Christmas, kissed my hand, said, "You always know how to make things beautiful." I smiled and leaned into his chest, already imagining the moment his world would tilt. I played the role like I was born for it, the devoted wife, rekindling love, making memories. And he, the adoring husband, had no idea he was walking straight into his own reckoning. I started calling old friends, the ones I hadn't seen in a while. One by one, I told them about this small, intimate anniversary gathering. Just a few familiar faces. "It wouldn't be the same without you," I said sweetly. And they came, like moths to the glow of nostalgia. Each one said yes, not knowing the others were coming. I curated the guest list, like a conductor arranging an orchestra. Every note mattered. Every presence had weight, especially the ones with secrets buried beneath their smiles. David didn't ask questions. He trusted me. How poetic. He offered suggestions, the wine, the playlist, even a few names to invite. I took notes, nodded, agreed. Inside, I was already constructing the moment. I imagined the way his eyes would shift, the twitch in his jaw, the blood draining from his face when the lights dimmed and the truth began to play out in front of a room full of people who thought they knew us. I wasn't planning a party. I was staging a resurrection of the woman he thought he'd broken. As the day approached, I became almost giddy. Not out of malice. This wasn't revenge for the sake of pain. It was clarity. It was standing at the edge of something I'd been circling for months and finally choosing to leap. The guest list was set, the venue booked, the projector tested, the speech written, revised, rehearsed. And David? He was still sleeping beside me, oblivious, dreaming in a house built on lies. I just had to make sure he stayed asleep long enough to hear his own story out loud. I chose my dress carefully, not for him, but for me. Simple, elegant, the same shade of ivory I wore at our wedding. A quiet echo of a promise he broke before the ink on our vows had dried. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself, not because I looked different, but because I finally saw all the pieces that had hardened and healed without me realizing. This wasn't the woman who cried on the kitchen floor. This was someone new, steady, unflinching, ready. The venue was a private room in the same place where we'd celebrated our engagement. Full circle, I guess. I arrived early, checked the lights, tested the sound, positioned the projector exactly how I wanted it. No glitches, no surprises. Every element was loaded and cued. My hands didn't shake. My voice was calm. I smiled at the staff and told them it was a big night. They wished me luck. I almost laughed. They had no idea just how big this night was going to be. Guests began to arrive one by one. The air filled with small talk and practiced laughter, the clink of glasses, the tight smiles of women who hadn't seen each other in years, or maybe didn't want to. I watched David float through the room, greeting them all like a king returning to his court. His eyes sparkled, his hand brushed the smalls of backs. He was in his element, the perfect host, the man of the hour. And I watched with a calm that felt almost dangerous. When it was time, I took his hand and led him to the front. He looked so proud. Proud of me, of us, of the life he thought he'd crafted so flawlessly. I turned to the room, raised my glass, and began to speak. About love, about trust, about how we build things with the people we let closest. My voice never cracked, not once. And when I turned to him, smiled sweetly and said, "And now, a tribute to our beautiful memories, and yours, David." I saw his smile falter, just for a second. It was enough. The lights dimmed. The screen came to life. At first, it was just photos, smiling faces, shared dinners, arms around shoulders, harmless, even sweet, until they weren't. The images shifted, text messages appeared, short, blunt. "When is she gone?" "Last night was perfect. I still taste you." Then screenshots, voice notes, a familiar laugh, a half-naked reflection in a hotel mirror. One by one, the air in the room thinned, jaws tightened, eyes widened. A fork clattered to the floor and no one bent to pick it up. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at them, at the friends who couldn't meet my eyes, at the men exchanging uneasy glances, at the woman in the back who whispered, "Oh my God," like a prayer. And I looked at David, frozen, pale, his lips parting, but nothing coming out, not even denial. Because this wasn't confrontation. This was evidence, and I hadn't raised my voice once. I didn't need to. The silence spoke loud enough. When the video ended, no one clapped. No one spoke. Some got up and left. Some stayed seated, too stunned to move. David just stood there, or maybe he was waiting to wake up. His hand twitched like he might reach for me, say something, explain it away. But I stepped back, just a few inches, but it was enough. I held his gaze and for the first time in months said exactly what I meant. Now we're even. And that was it. I didn't need a scene. No yelling, no plates thrown, no dramatic exit. I just turned away and walked to the door, feeling 20 pounds lighter and 100 years older. Behind me, the whispers began to rise like steam from boiling water. But I didn't look back. I had nothing left to defend. I'd said everything I needed to, not with words, but with truth. And in that moment, I wasn't broken. I was clean. The story spread faster than I expected. People whispered. People stared. A few, mostly women, came up to me in grocery stores or cafes, squeezing my hand like we shared some sacred secret. They'd say things like, "You were so brave," or, "I wish I'd done what you did." And I'd nod, smile politely, say thank you. But inside, I didn't feel brave. I felt empty, like someone had carved out the core of who I was and left only the outline. A woman-shaped shell that knew how to fake peace. David's life, though, that crumbled. Fast. Friends stopped calling. Clients dropped him. His email was leaked. Someone posted a clip from the party on social media. It made the rounds. The audio was faint, but you could hear enough. A message, a moan. My voice saying, "Now we're even." It became a kind of anthem, a meme, a warning. And while part of me wanted to disappear into the ground, another part, the part that had been invisible for far too long, stood a little taller. I filed for divorce a week later. There was no negotiation. No drawn-out court battle. He didn't even try to fight me on the terms. It was like he knew he'd already lost everything that mattered. And maybe, for the first time, he realized that I had been the prize all along. Not the parties, not the house, not the version of me he curated for show. Me, the real one, the one he never really saw. And now, he never would again. People called me strong, said I'd won, but healing doesn't look like a headline. It looks like standing in a new apartment you barely recognize, trying to remember how you like your eggs now that no one's watching. It looks like silence, heavy, sticky silence, when you wake up alone for the first time in 10 years. And yeah, it also looks like breathing easier, sleeping deeper, laughing without wondering who's lying behind your back. I wasn't fine, but I was finally free. The messages started small. A bouquet left at the front desk. A handwritten card, the kind he used to buy only when he was caught lying about something minor. But this time, it wasn't about forgetting an anniversary or making a stupid joke at a party. This was different. His words bled. "Please talk to me. I miss you. You have to believe me. It didn't mean anything." Funny, how they always say that after you've meant everything and still weren't enough to stop them. I didn't respond. Not once. Not out of strength, but preservation. I knew if I opened that door, even a crack, he'd find a way to slip through. David was like smoke that way, sweet, shapeless, and able to fill every empty space if you let him. So I didn't. I let the flowers die on the table. I let the letters pile up unopened. Eventually, I bought a small box and locked them away. A time capsule of everything I survived, not for nostalgia, just proof that it all happened, that I wasn't crazy. People kept asking if I felt vindicated, if exposing him had brought me peace, and I'd smile, always the polite smile, and say, "I did what I needed to." But peace? That's a slower thing. It doesn't arrive with a bang. It slips in like fog, and you have to sit real still to feel it. I started walking more, cooking for myself, relearning my own rhythms. I rediscovered my old journals, started writing again. Pages filled with stories I wasn't ready to share, but they were mine. Words that belonged to me alone. The apartment was small, but it had sunlight, real golden light that poured in through the windows each morning and didn't feel like performance. No curated perfection, no pretending, just silence, plants that refused to die, and my laptop sitting open on a table where love had once rotted. I started a novel. I called it What We Don't See. At first, it was just therapy. Then it became something else, a mirror, a map, a warning, and maybe, just maybe, the start of something honest. I didn't tell anyone about the box. Not my therapist. Not the one new friend I'd made in the building. Not even myself, really. It just sat there in the back of my closet, cool and heavy. I told myself I kept it for closure in case I ever forgot the details. But the truth is, I wasn't ready to let go of the rage. It was mine, familiar. It gave shape to the hollow places. I didn't need justice anymore. I'd already built that myself. What I needed was time, and space, and silence. Some days I'd catch myself rereading old texts, not his, but mine. Versions of myself I barely remembered. Soft, accommodating, always cushioning his ego like it was fragile crystal. I mourned her, the woman I used to be. Not because I missed her, but because she didn't deserve what happened. She thought love meant loyalty at any cost. She thought staying meant strength. But now, I knew better. Sometimes strength is walking away without slamming the door. Sometimes it's never opening it again. To the world, it looked like I had moved on. And in some ways, I had. I traveled. I read again. I took naps in the middle of the afternoon, just because I could. But healing isn't linear. It has sharp turns, quiet detours, grief that sneaks up on you while you're folding laundry or stirring pasta. And still, through all of it, I never responded. Not even once. But I read every return label. I recognized the handwriting. And I knew exactly what his desperation looked like, even if I never saw his face again. So when people asked if it was over, if I'd finally closed that chapter, I'd smile and nod and say, yes. Because what else could I say? That some ghosts don't haunt you. You carry them. In your muscles, your habits, your silences. That you can leave someone completely and still feel the bruise of their presence in the way you check your locks at night. I didn't want revenge anymore. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I could feel something shifting, and I knew the story wasn't finished. It had been almost a year to the day. The anniversary of the night everything changed, or unraveled, depending on how you wanted to look at it. I hadn't marked it on a calendar or lit a candle, but my body remembered. A heaviness in my chest when I woke up, a strange ache behind my eyes. I made tea, sat on the couch, stared out the window at the quiet street below. I thought about taking a walk, maybe writing a few lines. But then came the knock. 3 soft taps, like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. I opened the door, and my breath caught before I even fully understood why. Julia. Of all people, it was Julia. Her face was pale, puffy from crying, eyes darting like she'd rehearsed something and forgotten it all at once, and in her arms. A baby. Maybe 8 months old, dark curls, wide eyes that didn't know anything about the tension in the air. Julia opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "Hi," she whispered. I wasn't sure you'd be here." She looked down at the child like maybe he could explain what she couldn't. I didn't say anything at first. My heart was beating like it wanted to escape. I hadn't seen her since before the hamper. since the unraveling. Since she became the first loose thread in the life I'd stitched so tightly. I glanced down at the baby, then back at her. And before I could ask, before I could even form the words, she said, "He's David's. I didn't know how else to tell you." And just like that, the floor gave a little. Not enough to break me, just enough to remind me I hadn't quite finished falling. She started crying then, real tears. Shaky breath, hand gripping the carrier like it was the only solid thing in her life. "He told me you knew. He said you were okay with it. I thought you were cold. I don't know what I thought." Her voice cracked. But I was wrong. I didn't reach for her. I didn't pull her in or slam the door. I just stood there, suspended between everything we'd been and everything she was holding in her arms. And for once, I didn't feel rage. I just felt tired. So incredibly tired. I stepped aside. I didn't say a word, just moved back enough to let her in. She hesitated, like she still wasn't sure this was a door she should cross. But then she did, slowly, carefully, like guilt had weight and she was carrying it in her spine. She sat down on the edge of my couch, the baby resting on her lap now, fussing with the strap of her sweater. The room felt smaller with them in it. Not in a bad way, just dense, like air that had stories in it no one was ready to tell. She started talking, not all at once, but in waves. How she didn't know he'd been with others, how she thought it was just her, as if that made it better. How he told her we had drifted emotionally, physically, and that our marriage was more of a performance than a partnership. I listened, arms crossed, jaw tight, trying not to react. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because what I felt kept changing. Anger, pity, recognition. A strange, awful kind of déjà vu. I'd heard these words before, in different voices, at different times. And now, here they were again, shaped like an apology. "He never wanted to be a father," she whispered. "Not really, but he changed his mind, said it could be different this time." She looked down at the child, then up at me. I believed him. And when I didn't hear from him for months, I thought it was you. I thought you had pushed him away. I told myself you were cruel. But now, sitting here, I know I was wrong. Her voice cracked on that last word. And that's when the baby reached for her face, gently patting her cheek like he sensed something broken. I surprised myself when I moved closer. Not much, just a few steps. Enough to see the child more clearly. The dimple on his chin, the shape of his eyes. He looked like David, but he also didn't. He looked new, unwritten. And it hit me, deep in my ribs. This wasn't a consequence. This wasn't a weapon. This was a life. A little boy who didn't ask to be born from the ruins of other people's mistakes. And maybe for the first time since all of this began, I felt something I didn't expect. A sliver of grace. I went to the kitchen and poured tea for both of us. Not because I forgave her, not because it made anything okay, but because we were two women sitting in the aftermath of the same man, and sometimes kindness isn't about approval, it's about humanity. Julia took the cup with trembling hands, whispering thank you like it hurt to say it. The baby babbled something soft, reaching for the steam, and I smiled before I could stop myself. Not at her, at him. At the impossible innocence of someone who hadn't yet learned what it meant to lie. We sat in silence for a long time. She cried. I didn't. I had already done all my crying in private, in pieces, in places no one would ever find. When she finally stood to leave, I didn't say goodbye. I didn't offer to walk her out. But something in me shifted when I saw the way she struggled with the diaper bag, the carrier, the baby on her hip. "You can stay for dinner," I heard myself say. She froze. I think we both did. If you want, I added, quieter now, you don't have to go right away. She turned slowly, her eyes wide, and in them I saw the exhaustion of 1,000 apologies that words could never fix. I didn't expect gratitude. I didn't need it. I just walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, pulled out what I had: leftover soup, some bread, a half bottle of wine I'd forgotten about. Nothing fancy, nothing performative, just food, warmth, a soft place to land. We sat across from each other and passed things without speaking, the baby chewing on a piece of crust, the quiet finally feeling clean instead of heavy. In the fireplace, the box of David's letters burned. I didn't watch it turn to ash. I didn't need to. I already knew what they said, all of them. They were never really for me. They were for his conscience, his legacy, his need to be remembered, and I was done carrying those pieces of him. As I poured wine into 2 mismatched glasses, I thought about all the ways I'd imagined this ending, and none of them looked like this. Not betrayal, not victory, just 3 people eating quietly in a home built from the truth. Survivors of the same lie.